The desert sun burned mercilessly overhead as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her medical pack for the 100th time that morning. The weight of her equipment felt heavier than usual, though she had carried the same gear through countless missions across Afghanistan. Today felt different somehow, like the air itself was charged with electricity before a thunderstorm. Maria had been with Bravo Company for 8 months now, long enough to earn the respect of the hardened soldiers around her. At 26, she was older than many of the infantrymen she served alongside, having spent 3 years as a civilian paramedic before enlisting. Her calm demeanor under pressure had saved more lives than anyone kept count of, but, to most of the unit, she was simply Doc, the medic who patched them up and sent them back into the fight. Captain James Morrison watched her from across the forward operating base as she methodically checked her supplies. Morrison was a career soldier, 15 years in the Army, with 3 combat deployments under his belt. He had seen plenty of medics come and go, but Santos was different. There was something about the way she moved, the way she processed information, that reminded him more of a sniper than a traditional combat medic. The mission briefing that morning had been straightforward enough. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value target was holed up in a compound roughly 12 kilometers northeast of their position. The target was believed to be a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces throughout the region. The plan was simple: surround the compound, call for surrender, and, if that failed, neutralize the threat. What intelligence hadn't mentioned was the sniper. The convoy rolled out just after dawn, 6 vehicles carrying 32 soldiers across the rocky terrain. Maria rode in the 3rd vehicle, her aid station already mentally prepared for whatever casualties they might face. She had learned early in her deployment that preparation was everything. The soldiers who survived were the ones who thought 3 steps ahead. As they approached the target area, the landscape became increasingly hostile. Rocky outcroppings provided perfect cover for ambushes, while the sparse vegetation offered little concealment for advancing forces. Captain Morrison studied the terrain through his binoculars, noting potential firing positions and escape routes. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. The compound sat in a small valley, surrounded by hills that rose like ancient sentinels. It was a tactical nightmare. Anyone inside had clear sight lines in all directions, while approaching forces would be exposed across hundreds of meters of open ground. Morrison had seen similar setups before, and they rarely ended without casualties. "Santos," Morrison called over the radio. "Once we dismount, I want you positioned with the command element. Something tells me we're going to need you close." Maria acknowledged the order while scanning the ridgelines ahead. Her medic training had taught her to assess threats to her patients, and, right now, every soldier in the convoy was a potential patient. The terrain ahead screamed danger, and her instincts were screaming even louder. The vehicles came to a stop roughly 800 meters from the target compound. As the soldiers began their dismount procedures, Maria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded combat operations. She had learned to channel that energy into focus, using it to sharpen her senses rather than let it overwhelm her judgment. Morrison established his command post behind a cluster of boulders that provided decent cover from the compound. From this position, he could observe the assault teams as they maneuvered into position while maintaining radio contact with higher command. Maria set up her aid station nearby, close enough to respond quickly to casualties, but far enough back to avoid becoming a target herself. The first phase of the operation went according to plan. Alpha Team moved to the north side of the compound, while Bravo Team positioned themselves to the south. Charlie Team, led by Lieutenant Rodriguez, approached from the west, ready to breach the main entrance once the perimeter was secure. It was Rodriguez who first spotted the muzzle flash. The shot came from somewhere high on the eastern ridge, nearly 1,000 meters away. The bullet struck Rodriguez in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind a low stone wall. The crack of the rifle echoed across the valley a split second later, confirming what everyone already knew: they had a sniper problem. "Sniper, sniper, sniper." Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Eastern Ridge, approximate grid 774-528. I'm hit, but mobile." Morrison immediately began coordinating a response. The assault teams went to ground, using whatever cover they could find while trying to maintain their positions around the compound. The sniper had effectively pinned down 32 soldiers with a single well-placed shot. Maria was already moving toward Rodriguez's position when the second shot rang out. This bullet struck Private Johnson in the leg as he tried to reach better cover. Johnson went down hard, his screams echoing across the valley as blood began pooling beneath him. "Doc, we need you over here." Sergeant Williams called from Johnson's position. "He's bleeding bad." Maria sprinted across the exposed ground, her medical pack bouncing against her back as bullets began raining down from the ridge. The sniper had found his range now, and he was making every shot count. She reached Johnson's position just as a third bullet shattered the rock inches from her head. Johnson was conscious, but going into shock. The bullet had struck his femoral artery, and blood was pumping out with each heartbeat. Maria immediately applied pressure to the wound while fumbling for her tourniquets. Around her, the other soldiers were returning fire toward the ridge, but their shots were falling short. The sniper was too far away for their M4 rifles to be effective. "How bad is it, Doc?" Johnson asked through gritted teeth. "You're going to be fine," Maria replied automatically while working to stop the bleeding. "Just stay with me and keep talking." But even as she spoke the words, Maria knew they had a serious problem. Johnson needed immediate evacuation to a surgical facility, but the sniper controlled all the high ground around their position. Any attempt to move wounded soldiers to the evacuation point would result in more casualties. Morrison's voice came over the radio again. "All stations, this is 6. We need to neutralize that sniper before we can move our wounded. Does anyone have eyes on the target?" The responses came back negative across the board. The sniper was well concealed, probably in a hide that had been prepared days or even weeks in advance. He knew the terrain, knew the ranges, and had positioned himself perfectly to dominate the entire valley. Maria finished stabilizing Johnson and turned her attention to Rodriguez, who was making his way back to the command post with help from another soldier. The lieutenant's wound was less serious but still needed immediate attention. As she worked, Maria found herself studying the eastern ridge through her rifle scope. She had always been a good shot. Growing up in rural Montana, she had learned to hunt with her father from an early age. Later, during her initial military training, her marksmanship scores had been among the highest in her class. But being a good shot and being a sniper were two entirely different things. The sniper fired again, this time at Alpha Team's position. The bullet struck the radio antenna next to Staff Sergeant Kelly, destroying their primary communication link with the command post. The message was clear. The sniper wasn't just trying to kill soldiers, he was trying to isolate and demoralize them. Morrison was running out of options. He could call for air support, but that would take at least 20 minutes to arrive. He could request artillery, but the sniper's position was too close to civilian areas for effective bombardment. Meanwhile, his wounded soldiers were bleeding, and the assault on the compound had ground to a complete halt. That's when Maria made an observation that would change everything. "Captain," she said quietly, pointing toward the ridge. "Watch the shadows near that outcropping. Every time he fires, there's a brief flash of reflected light. He's using a scope with poor lens coating, probably an older Russian model." Morrison raised his binoculars and studied the area Maria had indicated. It took several minutes, but eventually he saw what she was talking about. A tiny glint of reflected sunlight, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. "Outstanding observation, Santos," Morrison said. "But knowing where he is doesn't solve our problem. None of our weapons have the range to reach him effectively." Maria was quiet for a moment, continuing to study the ridge through her own scope. She was calculating distances, wind conditions, and bullet trajectories in her head. The math was complex, but it was math she understood. "Sir," she said finally, "what about your Barrett?" Morrison looked at her with surprise. The Barrett M82 was his personal weapon, a .50 caliber sniper rifle that he carried but rarely used. It was capable of accurate fire out to over a mile, more than enough range to reach the enemy sniper's position. But using it effectively required skills that took years to develop. "Santos, that rifle weighs 30 pounds and kicks like a mule. Have you ever fired a 50 cal before?" "No, sir," Maria admitted. "But I understand the ballistics, and I can see the target clearly. Someone needs to take that shot, and I'm the only one in position to do it." Morrison hesitated. Giving his Barrett to the medic seemed like desperation, But desperate times called for desperate measures. Around them, soldiers continued to take cover while the sniper methodically worked to pick them off one by one. Something had to be done, and conventional solutions weren't working. The sound of another rifle shot echoed across the valley, followed immediately by a scream from Bravo team's position. Someone else had been hit, and Maria knew that every minute they waited meant more casualties. "Captain," she said firmly, "I can make this shot. But I need to do it now, before he relocates." Morrison stared at her for what felt like an eternity. In her eyes, he saw not the uncertainty of an untested medic, but the calm confidence of someone who had already visualized success. It was a look he had seen before, in the eyes of the best snipers he had ever worked with. Finally, he made his decision. "Rodriguez," Morrison called to his wounded lieutenant. "Take over aid station duties. Santos, you're with me." Maria felt her heart rate slow as she entered what she thought of as her medical mode, the state of focused calm that allowed her to perform surgery under fire. She began calculating the factors that would affect her shot: distance, wind speed, elevation difference, temperature, even the rotation of the earth. Every variable mattered when shooting at extreme range. Morrison led her to his position behind the largest boulder, where the Barrett lay waiting. The massive rifle looked almost alien compared to the M4 carbines carried by the other soldiers. Its bipod legs were extended, and a powerful scope was mounted on top. This wasn't a weapon for close combat. It was a precision instrument designed for one specific purpose. "The fundamentals are the same as any rifle," Morrison explained quickly. "Breathing, trigger control, follow through. But the recoil will surprise you, and the bullet will take almost 3 seconds to reach the target. You'll need to hold your sight picture until impact." Maria nodded, settling behind the rifle and adjusting the bipod to accommodate her smaller frame. Through the scope, the eastern ridge appeared much closer, and she could clearly see the rocky outcropping where the sniper was hidden. Now she just had to wait for him to reveal himself. The wait didn't last long. The enemy sniper, growing confident after his string of successful shots, became careless. Maria saw the brief glint of reflected light that indicated he was acquiring a new target. This was her moment. She controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to slow. The crosshairs settled on the spot where she calculated the sniper's position to be. Her finger found the trigger, and she began the slow, steady pressure that would send a .50 caliber bullet across nearly 1,000 meters of hostile territory. But as her finger tightened on the trigger, Maria realized that everything she thought she knew about herself was about to change. In a few seconds, she would no longer be just the medic who patched up wounded soldiers. She would be the soldier who had taken a life to save lives. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a heavy blanket, but it didn't make her hesitate. If anything, it sharpened her focus even more. Lives depended on this shot, not just the soldiers who were already wounded, but all the others who would be hit if the sniper remained in position. Maria took her final breath, let half of it out, and held. The crosshairs steadied on their target. Her finger completed its rearward travel, and the Barrett roared to life. The massive recoil from the Barrett drove Maria backward against the boulder, the rifle stock slamming into her shoulder with enough force to leave a bruise that would last for weeks. The thunderous boom of the .50 caliber round echoed across the valley like a thunderclap, momentarily drowning out all other sounds of battle. For what seemed like an eternity, the entire world held its breath. Maria maintained her sight picture through the scope, just as Captain Morrison had instructed. Through the powerful optics, she watched the bullet's trajectory across the valley, a faint distortion in the air that only the most experienced marksman could detect. Time seemed to stretch like molten metal as the projectile covered the distance to its target. 3 seconds had never felt so long. Then, high on the eastern ridge, Maria saw a small puff of dust rise from the rocks near the outcropping. The glint of reflected light that had marked the enemy sniper's position disappeared instantly. There was no dramatic explosion, no Hollywood-style death scene, just a sudden absence where moments before there had been a deadly threat. "Target down," Maria reported quietly into her radio, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. The silence that followed was broken by cheers from soldiers throughout the valley. After being pinned down for nearly an hour, watching their comrades fall one by one, the sudden elimination of the sniper felt like a miracle. But Maria felt no sense of celebration. Instead, she was consumed by a strange mixture of relief, responsibility, and something she couldn't quite identify. Captain Morrison had been watching through his binoculars and confirmed what Maria already knew. Outstanding shot, Santos. I count one enemy Kia at approximately 970 meters. That's some of the finest shooting I've ever witnessed. But there was no time for congratulations. With the sniper threat eliminated, Morrison immediately refocused on the wounded soldiers scattered throughout the valley. All stations, this is 6. Sniper threat is neutralized. Begin casualty collection immediately. Santos, get back to your aid station. Maria reluctantly handed the Barrett back to Morrison and returned to her medical duties. Private Johnson was still conscious, but growing weaker from blood loss despite her earlier treatment. Lieutenant Rodriguez was stable but needed proper medical attention for his shoulder wound. And somewhere in the rocks near Bravo team's position, another soldier was calling for medical assistance. As she worked to stabilize Johnson for transport, Maria found herself analyzing the shot she had just taken. The calculations had been correct: distance, windage, elevation, even the slight adjustment needed for the Coriolis effect at extreme range. But there had been something else, something beyond the mathematics that had guided that bullet to its target. "Doc, you saved our lives out there," Johnson said weakly as she checked his pulse. "I heard what you did. Never seen anything like it." Maria nodded absently while monitoring his vital signs. Johnson's blood pressure was dropping faster than she would have liked, and his skin was growing pale and clammy. They needed to get him to a surgical facility within the next hour, or the wound that should have been survivable might become fatal. "Just doing my job," she replied automatically, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. Taking precise rifle shots at enemy combatants wasn't typically part of a medic's job description. The helicopter evacuation arrived 30 minutes later, a Black Hawk that landed in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. Maria supervised the loading of the wounded soldiers, making sure each casualty was properly secured and that the flight medic understood their conditions and treatment requirements. As the helicopter lifted off and disappeared over the ridge, Maria realized that the day's mission was far from over. With the sniper eliminated, Morrison could finally proceed with the original objective, capturing or eliminating the Taliban commander in the compound below. The assault began immediately. Alpha and Bravo teams moved in from their positions while Charlie team, now led by Staff Sergeant Williams in Rodriguez's absence, prepared to breach the main entrance. Maria repositioned herself to provide medical support for the assault, though she suspected the hardest fighting was behind them. She was right. The compound's defenders, demoralized by the loss of their sniper and surrounded by superior forces, surrendered after only token resistance. The Taliban commander was captured alive, along with several of his subordinates, and a cache of weapons and intelligence materials. As the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains, Maria found herself sitting alone on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley where the day's events had unfolded. The compound below was now secured, the wounded had been evacuated, and the mission had been declared a complete success. But Maria felt anything but victorious. The weight of what she had done was beginning to settle on her shoulders. She had killed a man today, not in the heat of close combat, not in self-defense, but with a single, calculated shot from nearly a kilometer away. The sniper had been trying to kill her comrades, and her actions had undoubtedly saved lives. But taking a life, even in war, even for the right reasons, was something that changed a person forever. Captain Morrison found her there as the last light was fading from the sky. He settled beside her on the rocks, his Barrett slung across his back once again. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly. Maria considered the question carefully before answering. "No, sir. I made the right choice. But that doesn't make it easy." Morrison nodded. "It never does. And if it ever becomes easy, that's when you need to worry. The fact that you're struggling with this tells me I made the right decision trusting you with that rifle." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Finally, Morrison spoke again. "Santos, I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star for your actions today. What you did out there saved American lives, period. But I'm also wondering if you've ever considered a different career path." Maria looked at him with surprise. "Sir, The Army has a sniper school at Fort Benning. Best marksmanship training in the world. They're always looking for soldiers with natural talent and the right mindset. What you demonstrated today, the ability to stay calm under pressure, make complex calculations under fire, and take a precision shot when lives are on the line, those aren't skills that can be taught. They're gifts. The suggestion caught Maria completely off guard. She had enlisted as a medic because she wanted to save lives, not take them. The idea of becoming a sniper, someone whose primary job was killing enemy combatants, seemed to contradict everything she believed about herself. I appreciate the confidence, sir, but I'm a medic. I save lives, I don't take them. You did both today, Morrison pointed out. And there are plenty of combat medics who could have treated those wounds. But there was only one person in that entire valley who could have made that shot when it counted. As they made their way back to the forward operating base, Maria found herself thinking about Morrison's words. She had always believed her purpose in the Army was to heal, to mend what war had broken. But today had shown her a different kind of healing, the kind that came from eliminating threats to her fellow soldiers. The ride back to base was quiet, with most of the soldiers exhausted from the day's events. Maria used the time to write up her medical reports, documenting the treatment she had provided to each wounded soldier. But her mind kept drifting back to those 3 seconds when the bullet was in flight, and the strange sense of certainty she had felt about its trajectory. Back at the FOB, word of Maria's shot had already spread throughout the unit. Soldiers who had barely acknowledged her existence before now looked at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. She was no longer just Doc. She was the medic who had dropped an enemy sniper at nearly 1,000 meters with a single shot. The attention made Maria uncomfortable. She had never sought recognition for her medical work, and she didn't want it for her marksmanship either. All she had done was what needed to be done to protect her fellow soldiers. But she was beginning to understand that in the military, perception could be as important as reality. That night, as she lay in her bunk listening to the distant sounds of war, Maria found herself replaying the events of the day over and over again. The sight picture through the Barrett scope, the feeling of the trigger breaking cleanly, the long moment of waiting as the bullet flew across the valley, the sudden silence when the enemy fire stopped. She had crossed a line today, one that she could never uncross. The woman who woke up this morning was different from the one lying in this bunk. Tomorrow, she would still be a medic, still dedicated to saving lives. But she would also be something else, something she was only beginning to understand. 3 bunks over, Private Johnson's empty cot served as a reminder of why that line had needed to be crossed. He was alive tonight because of the skills she had never known she possessed. Lieutenant Rodriguez was alive because of her quick thinking and steady hands. How many other soldiers would be alive in the future because of what she had learned about herself today? The questions followed Maria into her dreams, where she found herself standing on a mountaintop with a rifle in her hands, looking out over a world that seemed both more dangerous and more precious than it had before. In her dream, she was neither purely medic nor purely warrior, but something new, something that hadn't existed in the Army's organizational charts, but was desperately needed in the mountains of Afghanistan. When she woke the next morning, Maria Santos was still grappling with the transformation that had begun the moment Captain Morrison handed her his Barrett. She didn't know it yet, but that transformation was far from complete. The shot that had eliminated the enemy sniper was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, her capabilities, and her purpose in the United States Army. The desert sun rose over the forward operating base, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Another day in Afghanistan was beginning, and with it, new challenges that would test the soldier Maria was becoming. She had proven she could take a life to save lives, but now she would have to decide what to do with that knowledge. The Army had a way of finding the right person for the right job at the right time. Yesterday, that person had been a combat medic with exceptional marksmanship skills. But tomorrow, that person might be something entirely different, something the war in Afghanistan desperately needed, even if it didn't know how to ask for it yet. As Maria prepared for another day of uncertain missions and difficult decisions, she carried with her the memory of those 3 seconds when a bullet flew across a valley and changed everything. The weight of that moment would stay with her forever, but So would the knowledge that when her fellow soldiers needed her most, she had found a way to answer the call. The transformation of Maria Santos from medic to something more complex and dangerous was only beginning. But, already, word of her extraordinary shot was spreading beyond the forward operating base, reaching the ears of people who understood the value of a soldier who could both save lives and take them with equal precision. Soon, Maria would discover that her reputation had preceded her, and that the army had plans for soldiers like her, plans that would take her far beyond the mountains of Afghanistan and into a world where the line between healer and warrior became even more blurred. 2 weeks after the sniper incident, Maria was treating a soldier for a minor infection when Captain Morrison approached her aid station with an expression she had never seen before. There was something formal about his demeanor, almost ceremonial, that immediately put her on alert. "Santos, I need you to pack your gear. You're being transferred." Maria looked up from her patient's wound, confusion written across her face. "Transferred, sir? Where?" "Fort Benning, Georgia. You leave tomorrow morning on the first transport out." The news hit Maria like a physical blow. Fort Benning was home to the Army's sniper school, the most elite marksmanship training facility in the United States military. But she hadn't requested a transfer, hadn't even expressed interest in sniper training beyond that single conversation with Morrison. "Sir, I didn't apply for sniper school. I'm a medic. My unit needs me here." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Santos, this isn't a request. This is a direct order from division. Apparently, word of your shot reached some very influential people. They want to see what you're capable of with proper training." The patient Maria had been treating listened to the exchange with obvious interest. Corporal Martinez was one of the soldiers who had witnessed her elimination of the enemy sniper, and his respect for her skills was evident in his expression. "Doc, you should go," Martinez said quietly. "What you did out there, that was something special. Maybe this is where you're supposed to be." Maria finished bandaging Martinez's wound while her mind raced through the implications of this unexpected development. She had found her rhythm in Afghanistan, had built relationships with the soldiers she served alongside, had established herself as a trusted member of the medical team. The idea of leaving all of that behind to pursue training she had never sought felt wrong somehow. But there was another part of her, a part that had been growing stronger since the day she fired Morrison's Barrett, that was intrigued by the possibilities. The precision required for extreme-range shooting appealed to the same part of her mind that excelled at complex medical procedures. Both required steady hands, clear thinking under pressure, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions in seconds. That evening, Maria walked the perimeter of the forward operating base one last time, trying to process the dramatic change her life was about to undergo. The mountains of Afghanistan had become familiar to her over the past 8 months, their rocky peaks and hidden valleys as recognizable as the neighborhoods of her childhood. Tomorrow, she would be leaving all of this behind for the pine forests and red clay of Georgia. She found Morrison cleaning his Barrett near the armory, the massive rifle disassembled on a canvas tarp. He looked up as she approached, noting the uncertainty in her expression. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. "More like 1,000 second thoughts," Maria admitted. "Captain, I joined the army to save lives, not to become a professional killer. What if sniper school changes me into someone I don't want to be?" Morrison paused in his cleaning routine, choosing his words carefully. "Santos, let me tell you something about snipers that most people don't understand. Yes, they're trained killers, but they're also some of the most precise, disciplined, and mentally tough soldiers in the entire military. A good sniper doesn't just eliminate targets. They gather intelligence, protect friendly forces, and provide overwatch for operations that save hundreds of lives." He reassembled the rifle with practiced efficiency before continuing. "The skills you'll learn at Benning won't just make you a better shooter. They'll make you a better soldier, period. And if you ever decide you want to go back to being a medic full-time, you'll be a much more effective one." Maria spent that night writing letters to her family, trying to explain a career change that she didn't fully understand herself. How could she tell her parents that their daughter, who had always been passionate about healing, was being sent to learn how to kill with surgical precision? How could she explain that she was excited about the opportunity despite her reservations? The flight to Fort Benning took 18 hours, with stops in Kuwait and Germany. Maria used the travel time to research what she was getting herself into. The United States Army Sniper School was a 7-week course that had a failure rate of nearly 60%. Students were pushed to their physical and mental limits, trained to function effectively under extreme stress, and taught to make shots that most people would consider impossible. The school accepted only volunteers who met strict physical and mental requirements, had proven marksmanship skills, and came with strong recommendations from their commanding officers. Maria met the technical requirements, but she was far from a typical candidate. Most sniper students were infantry soldiers with years of combat experience. Maria was a medic with 8 months in Afghanistan and exactly 1 combat shot to her credit. Fort Benning in February was a stark contrast to the desert environment Maria had grown accustomed to. The Georgia pine forests were green and humid, and the red clay soil seemed to get into everything. But it was the intensity of the other students that struck her most forcefully. These were serious soldiers with serious reputations, and many of them questioned what a medic was doing in their midst. The first day of sniper school was devoted to administrative processing and initial evaluations. Maria found herself grouped with 19 other soldiers, all of them male, most of them significantly larger than her compact frame. The instructors were seasoned Special Forces veterans who had seen combat in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other classified locations around the world. Staff Sergeant First Class William Bill Thompson was the lead instructor, a man whose reputation preceded him even among elite soldiers. Thompson had over 100 confirmed kills across multiple deployments, and his students called him the Ghost of Fallujah after a legendary urban warfare engagement where he had eliminated 16 enemy combatants in a single night. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thompson announced to the assembled students, "welcome to the United States Army Sniper School. Over the next 7 weeks, we are going to break you down and rebuild you into precision weapons. Some of you will succeed. Most of you will fail. Those who fail will be sent back to their units with a notation in their records that they were not suitable for sniper training." His eyes scanned the group and settled on Maria. "We have one student who is not infantry, which is unusual but not unprecedented. Sergeant Santos comes to us with a recommendation from her commanding officer and a verified long-range kill. However, one shot does not make a sniper. If you think your medical training gives you some kind of advantage here, you're mistaken. In fact, it may be a liability." Maria felt the eyes of the other students turning toward her, some curious, others skeptical. She had expected this kind of reception, but it still stung to be singled out before the course had even begun. "Sergeant Santos," Thompson continued, "your civilian medical background and your military medical training have taught you to preserve life at all costs. Over the next 7 weeks, we are going to train you to take life efficiently and without hesitation. If you have moral or ethical problems with that mission, you can walk away right now with no penalty to your record." The challenge was clear, and Maria felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on her as she considered her response. This was her last chance to return to the familiar world of combat medicine, to remain the person she had always believed herself to be. "No, sir," she said quietly but firmly. "I'm here to learn." Thompson nodded approvingly. "Outstanding. Then, let's begin." The first week of sniper school was designed to eliminate students who lacked the physical conditioning or mental discipline required for the course. The days began at 0430 with physical training that pushed even experienced infantry soldiers to their limits. Running, climbing, crawling, carrying heavy equipment across miles of difficult terrain, all while maintaining the mental focus required for precision shooting. Maria's smaller size was a disadvantage in some exercises, but her medical training had given her an understanding of human physiology that helped her pace herself effectively. While some of the larger students burned out early from pushing too hard, Maria maintained a steady pace that allowed her to complete every exercise. The academic portion of the first week covered ballistics, meteorology, and camouflage. Maria discovered that her medical background was actually an advantage here. Her understanding of anatomy helped her visualize the effects of different bullets on human targets, while her experience with complex calculations made the ballistics mathematics relatively straightforward. But it was the psychological training that proved most challenging. The instructors used various techniques to induce stress during shooting exercises: loud noises, time pressure, physical discomfort, even personal insults. The goal was to teach students to maintain accuracy under conditions that would cause most people to fall apart. A sniper who can only shoot well when conditions are perfect is useless, Sergeant Thompson explained during one particularly grueling exercise. You need to be able to put a bullet exactly where you want it when you're tired, stressed, scared, and under fire. That requires a level of mental discipline that most people never develop. Maria found herself drawing on her medical training in unexpected ways. The ability to remain calm while performing surgery under fire translated well to remaining calm while shooting under stress. The habit of double-checking every calculation and procedure helped her avoid the small mistakes that eliminated many students from the program. By the end of the first week, 4 students had dropped out or been eliminated. The remaining 16 faced increasingly difficult challenges as the course progressed. Long-range shooting exercises began at 600 meters and gradually extended to over a mile. Students were required to make precise shots in various weather conditions, from different positions, and with minimal preparation time. Maria's first attempt at an 800-meter shot was a complete miss. The bullet struck the ground 3 feet to the left of the target, a humiliating failure in front of the other students. But instead of becoming discouraged, she analyzed what had gone wrong and made corrections for her second attempt. Better, Thompson commented as her second shot struck the target near the center. But near isn't good enough for a sniper. Near gets your teammates killed. The criticism stung, but Maria used it as motivation to improve. She spent her limited free time studying wind patterns, practicing breathing techniques, and visualizing successful shots. Gradually, her accuracy improved to the point where she was competing with the best students in the class. It was during the 3rd week of the course that Maria experienced what instructors called the moment of truth, the psychological transition from someone who could kill if necessary to someone who could kill efficiently and without hesitation. The realization came during a combat simulation exercise where she was required to engage multiple targets rapidly while under simulated enemy fire. As she moved through the course, identifying threats and engaging them with precision shots, Maria felt something click into place in her mind. The targets were no longer paper silhouettes or steel plates. They were threats to be eliminated quickly and efficiently. Her medical training had taught her to save lives, but it had also taught her to think systematically about problems and execute solutions under pressure. When the exercise ended, Maria had achieved perfect scores on all engagements. But, more importantly, she had proven to herself that she could function as a sniper when lives depended on her accuracy. "Excellent work, Santos," Thompson said after reviewing her scores. "You're beginning to think like a sniper instead of like a medic who can shoot." The comment was meant as a compliment, but it left Maria with mixed feelings. She was succeeding at sniper school, but at what cost? Was she losing the part of herself that cared more about healing than harming? Or was she simply discovering abilities she had never known she possessed? As the course entered its final weeks, Maria found herself among the top 5 students in overall rankings. Her shooting scores were consistently high, her academic performance was excellent, and her ability to remain calm under stress had impressed even the most skeptical instructors. But success at sniper school also meant accepting a fundamental change in her military role and her identity as a soldier. She was no longer just a medic who happened to be a good shot. She was becoming a sniper who retained medical training. The distinction was more than semantic. It represented a complete transformation in how she viewed herself and her purpose in the Army. The final exercise of sniper school would test everything she had learned over the previous 6 weeks. It would also determine whether Maria Santos would graduate as one of the Army's newest snipers or return to Afghanistan as just another medic with an interesting story to tell. The final exercise of sniper school took place during the 7th and final week of training, in a remote section of Fort Benning that had been designed to simulate real-world combat conditions. Maria and the 11 remaining students would spend 72 hours in the field, conducting reconnaissance missions, gathering intelligence, and engaging targets at extreme ranges while being hunted by opposing forces played by special operations soldiers. Maria adjusted her ghillie suit one final time as she prepared to move into position for the exercise. The camouflage system had taken her weeks to perfect, weaving natural vegetation into a base layer that would help her blend seamlessly into the Georgia forest. At a distance of 50 meters, a properly positioned sniper in a well-constructed ghillie suit was virtually invisible to the naked eye. Staff Sergeant Thompson gathered the students for final instructions as the sun began to set on what would be their most challenging test yet. The exercise scenario was based on a real mission from the Iraq War, where a sniper team had spent 3 days conducting surveillance on a suspected weapons cache while avoiding capture by enemy forces. Your mission is to infiltrate the target area, establish overwatch positions, and gather intelligence on enemy activities, Thompson explained. You will have 6 targets to engage over the course of the exercise, ranging from 800 to 1,500 meters. Miss more than one shot, and you fail. Get detected by opposing forces, and you fail. Fail to provide accurate intelligence reports, and you fail. The stakes were clear. After 6 weeks of intensive training, this single exercise would determine who graduated as qualified snipers and who returned to their original units as failures. Maria had come too far to fail now, but she knew that success would require everything she had learned and more. Each student was assigned a different infiltration route and target area. Maria's sector was a section of dense forest overlooking a valley where opposing forces had established a mock enemy compound. Her mission was to observe the compound for enemy activities, engage specific targets as they appeared, and avoid detection for the full duration of the exercise. The infiltration began at midnight. Maria moved slowly through the forest, using techniques she had learned for silent movement over difficult terrain. Every step was calculated, every sound analyzed. Night vision equipment allowed her to see clearly in the darkness, but it also meant that any opposing forces would have the same advantage. It took Maria 4 hours to reach her designated position, a rocky outcropping that provided excellent fields of fire while offering concealment from multiple directions. She carefully constructed her hide, using natural materials to create a position that would be invisible from more than 20 meters away. As dawn broke over the forest, Maria settled into her hide and began her surveillance of the target area. Through her rifle scope, she could see the enemy compound in detail. Opposing forces moved through the area in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully planned to test the students' observation skills. The first target appeared at 0800 hours, an opposing force member carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The target was positioned at approximately 900 meters from Maria's hide, well within her effective range. But the shot was complicated by wind conditions and the fact that the target was only visible for brief periods as he moved between buildings. Maria had learned to control her breathing, to time her shots between heartbeats, to account for every variable that could affect bullet trajectory. As the target paused in an open area, she took her shot. The simulated round struck center mass, and the target immediately signaled that he had been killed by raising his hands above his head. Target 1 eliminated, Maria reported quietly into her radio. The exercise continued throughout the day, with targets appearing at irregular intervals and ranges. Some shots were straightforward, others required complex calculations to account for extreme range or difficult conditions. Maria successfully engaged 5 of her 6 assigned targets, missing only once when an unexpected wind gust affected her bullet trajectory. But accuracy was only part of the test. The opposing forces were actively hunting for the sniper students, using techniques that real enemies would employ to locate and eliminate snipers. Maria had to remain motionless for hours at a time, communicating only when necessary, maintaining perfect camouflage even when opposing forces passed within meters of her position. On the second night of the exercise, Maria's skills were put to their ultimate test. An opposing force patrol had detected signs that a sniper was operating in their sector and had begun a systematic search of potential hide sites. Maria could hear them moving through the forest, using flashlights and night vision to examine every outcropping and tree line. The patrol approached to within 10 meters of Maria's hide before moving on without detecting her presence. The experience was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, proof that the camouflage and concealment techniques she had learned actually worked when properly applied. The final target appeared on the 3rd morning of the exercise. It was the most challenging shot of Maria's military career, a target at 1,500 meters, positioned in a narrow window of a building, visible for only a few seconds at a time. The mathematics required to make the shot were complex, involving calculations for bullet drop, wind drift, and even the rotation of the Earth. Maria had made shots at this range during training, but only under perfect conditions with unlimited time to prepare. This shot would have to be made quickly, under field conditions, with the knowledge that missing would mean failing the entire course. She waited for over an hour, watching the target window through her scope, calculating and recalculating the variables that would affect her shot. When the target finally appeared, Maria had less than 10 seconds to aim and fire before he disappeared again. The shot felt perfect as it left the rifle. Smooth trigger press, proper follow-through, no indication that anything had gone wrong. But at 1,500 meters, it would take nearly 4 seconds for the bullet to reach its target. For seconds during which any number of factors could affect the shot's accuracy. Through her scope, Maria watched the target suddenly jerk backward and disappear from the window. A moment later, her radio crackled with confirmation that the target had been successfully engaged. Exercise complete, came the announcement from the control tower. All students returned to base for debriefing. The walk back to the base took several hours, giving Maria time to process what she had accomplished over the previous 3 days. She had successfully completed every aspect of the final exercise, demonstrating that she could function effectively as a sniper under realistic combat conditions. But, more than that, she had proven to herself that the transformation that had begun with that single shot in Afghanistan was complete. She was no longer a medic who happened to be good with a rifle. She was a trained sniper who retained medical skills. The distinction had taken weeks to understand, but it was now clear in her mind. The graduation ceremony took place the following day. Of the 20 students who had begun the course 7 weeks earlier, only 8 completed all requirements successfully. Maria stood with her fellow graduates as Sergeant Thompson presented each of them with the distinctive sniper badge that would mark them as qualified precision marksmen. "Sergeant Santos," Thompson said as he pinned the badge to her uniform, "you came to us as a medic with potential. You're leaving as one of the finest natural shooters I've ever had the privilege to train. The Army is lucky to have you." The compliment meant more to Maria than any medal or commendation ever could. She had earned the respect of instructors who had initially questioned her presence in the course, and she had proven that dedication and skill mattered more than background or expectations. But graduation from sniper school was just the beginning. Maria would now be assigned to a unit that could make use of her unique combination of medical and marksmanship skills. The Army had been experimenting with cross-trained specialists who could function in multiple roles, and Maria represented the success of that concept. Her new assignment came through 3 days after graduation. She would be joining a special operations medical team that was deploying to Iraq. The unit specialized in high-risk missions where combat medics needed to function in small teams, often without backup or immediate support. Having a medic who could also serve as an overwatch sniper was exactly what the unit needed. As Maria packed her gear for yet another deployment to a combat zone, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning in Afghanistan when Captain Morrison had handed her his Barrett rifle. She had discovered abilities she never knew she possessed, and had been willing to embrace a transformation that challenged everything she thought she knew about herself. The woman who boarded the transport plane to Iraq was fundamentally different from the medic who had enlisted 3 years earlier with dreams of saving lives on the battlefield. She was still committed to that mission, but she now understood that sometimes saving lives required taking them with surgical precision. Maria's new unit was based at a classified location in Iraq, conducting operations that would never appear in official records or news reports. Her teammates were among the most elite soldiers in the United States military, specialists who had been selected for their ability to function effectively in extreme situations. On her first mission with the new unit, Maria found herself on a rooftop overlooking a hostile neighborhood in Baghdad, providing overwatch for a team conducting a high-value target raid below. Through her rifle scope, she watched her teammates move through narrow alleyways while she scanned for threats from her elevated position. When an enemy sniper appeared in a window 800 meters away, preparing to engage the team below, Maria eliminated the threat with a single shot before he could fire. The engagement was over in seconds, but it saved the lives of soldiers who never even knew they had been in danger. "Nice shooting, Doc," came the radio call from the team leader below. "Threat neutralized." As she continued her Overwatch duties, Maria realized that she had found her true calling in the military. She was neither purely a medic nor purely a sniper, but something new, a hybrid specialist who could save lives through healing or through precise application of lethal force. The war in Iraq would present her with countless opportunities to use both sets of skills, often in the same mission. She would treat wounded teammates under fire, then transition to providing precision fire support. She would save the lives of enemy combatants who surrendered, then eliminate others who posed threats to friendly forces. Years later, Maria would look back on that moment in Afghanistan when she first picked up Captain Morrison's Barrett rifle as the beginning of a journey that had transformed not just her career, but her understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. She had learned that the line between healer and warrior was not as clear as she had once believed, and that sometimes the greatest act of healing was preventing harm from occurring in the first place. The medic who had seemed like just another support soldier had become something much more valuable, a precision instrument in the hands of commanders who understood that the future of warfare belonged to soldiers who could function effectively in multiple roles. Maria Santos had found her place in that future, and she would spend the rest of her military career proving that sometimes the most effective way to save lives was to be willing to take them when circumstances demanded it. The transformation was complete, but the mission would continue for as long as there were soldiers who needed her unique combination of skills to bring them home safely.